Hey everybody, how you doing? This is Kevin Gallagher, and you are watching Time Out with Kevin Gallagher. And we're here. We broadcast onto television live on Friday nights, 8:30 p.m., and that's in Connecticut, all over Connecticut. And you have also, let's see, Monday mornings at 11 a.m., and we also broadcast the audio of the programs out onto the Truth Be Told Radio Network, and that is Friday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern. So you can check that out. Folks, you can also go to timeoutyoutube.com. That's timeoutyoutube.com, and you can check out 25 years worth of shows that are up on that YouTube page, and you can go there. I got that URL set up so it makes it real easy to get there. And we are continuing our series tonight, and we're doing show number 2 or 3. I forget which, but we're here with Tim Kynes, and Tim is somebody who has a show called God Save the King that is on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. He airs Friday nights at 10 p.m., and that's Eastern time. And Tim has studied the life and times around that time period when Jesus Christ was actually born, and has studied that for about 35 years. And he's a great wealth of information about this subject. And as Tim has said in previous interviews and such, and on his own show, he talks about the Christian mythology. And I hope some of you don't get offended by that, but what we believe happened during that time and the actual events and their significance have been kind of lost through the mist of time. And the actual events, as opposed to the traditions that we hold, are two completely different things. And what you'll find is, from the little bit that I know, from what I've looked into, the actual events are much cooler, much more interesting than anything that we see with our traditions. So Tim Kynes, I want to thank you very much for joining me here on the program tonight. I hope you're doing well. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Good to see you too. A real pleasure to be here.
You're welcome, sir. Where would you like to start? Because we had covered some other areas before, and what I want to do is, I think what we're going to be doing is kind of looking at the real backstory of what was going on with Rome, and looking at that because it's fascinating. Because Tim, when I first started getting involved in really looking at the Bible and studying the Bible after I'd become a Christian, I found the Romans to be absolutely fascinating. You look at, it sounds kind of funny, but they actually had toilets. They had working toilets. They still have some of those around in areas where the Roman troops were. And when you look at designing houses and barracks and things of that nature, anywhere where you're dealing with water, especially running water through a building, that's the most difficult part of the engineering. And these guys had a lot of this stuff figured out. They understood a lot of great things. A lot of our laws and things are standing on their shoulders, but yet they would, throw Christians to the lions. People would battle to the death, and the Greeks were the same way. And it just gets, there's such a dichotomy there.
Oh, no kidding.
Very much so. I mean, kind of like great extremes and great intellect and great brutality at the same time. And you wouldn't necessarily think that you would see something like that in the same culture, but yet there it is.
Yeah, there it is. The great and terrible beast, as Daniel would have said. But yeah, completely agree with you. I'm very fascinated by the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire. And yes, the two extremes. I mean, incredible, philosophy and jurisprudence and engineering, and yet just a formidable military force that just crushed everybody. So I think the place to start, however, is, as is often the case when we talk about God Save the King in particular and historical things in general, you gotta back up and get a running start. So we've talked about this before, but I do just want to remind those tuning in and those listeners and those watching a very quick background behind my work itself, which is that when I first started this work, it was under the assumption that Jesus was not born on December 25th, but that the story really didn't change very much. And then over time, as I delved deeper and deeper and deeper into the research, I discovered that, oh my God, the story does change. The story changes significantly. That the traditional nativity story, as you indicated a moment ago, I now have no challenge, and I don't mean this to be offensive, but I just have no challenge whatsoever, no personal challenge to call that Christian mythology, because it's just not how the story went down. So back in my earlier research, as I started to discover that the traditional nativity story was not necessarily accurate, I tried to tell the story from different points of view. So initially that was through the eyes of the shepherds, through the eyes of the wise men, or through the eyes of King Herod. And then over time, that has expanded and magnified to now the way I divide up my work is I call it the Chronicles. So there is the Judean Chronicle, which is about Joseph and Mary and the Hasmoneans and things like that. And then there is the Parthian Chronicle. So that's the wise men and the Magi and how we look at astronomy, because that's, they arrive saying we have seen a star in the east. So all the astronomy is included in the Parthian Chronicle. But then the final one is the Roman Chronicle. So this is what was going on in the Roman Empire leading up to the birth of Christ. Not so much how they would have reacted, because they most likely wouldn't have even noticed that there was a young child born in some backwater province that they weren't really paying attention to. But the background story to what was going on in the Roman Empire is extremely provocative, especially when you look at who the players are in this story. We talked about this last week with our friend Michael Parker, the fact that the contemporaries in this story are Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, Mark Antony, Cleopatra, that these are the players in this, we poked fun in this Game of Thrones, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, you compared it to that in the previous show, which, at first I was kind of like, Game of Thrones. But when you start thinking about it and you start putting in, like I had said earlier, the level of brutality of these people, because when you had a change of regime, it wasn't like what we do today. You have a vote and one person packs their bags and leaves, the other and moves in. No. You're talking about whole bloodlines being completely destroyed. I mean, they were all murdered, and then the new people came in and took power.
Exactly. And see now, and what we're going to do tonight is we're going to add an entire new layer to that story by looking at the Roman background. Okay. See, because most of us, unfortunately, suffer from a pretty deplorable education when it comes to classical antiquity. We don't know squat about the Greeks or the Romans or anything like that. Now, some of us who took up the Bible, now we've learned a little bit about the Greeks and the Romans and the Parthians and the ancient empires of that era and that time. But most people, our education about this is pretty limited. So you actually have to back up all the way to 753 BC, which is the traditional date of the founding of the Roman kingdom. Okay. Not the Roman Republic, not the Roman Empire, the Roman kingdom. Okay. And the Roman kingdom was ruled by an elected monarch. It was ruled by a king, but it was ruled by an elected monarch. And the Roman kingdom lasted roughly 250 years. So then the traditional date of the origin of the Roman Republic is 509 BC. Okay. And this is when you saw Rome really start to expand its control beyond simply the city of Rome and the immediate vicinity to, frankly, a large portion of the Mediterranean world. And this happened by a combination of conquest and alliance, that they might start an alliance with someone. So during the Republic, during the Roman Republic, okay, not the empire, during the Roman Republic, the Roman government was headed up by two annually elected, what they called consuls, consuls, consuls. And they were consulted by the Senate. So you had these two men, two consuls, and they were elected. And then you had the Senate that advised them. So Remember, that's 509 BC. Okay.
Right.
Now, so in round numbers, talk 500 years later, 9 BC, we're approaching the time of the birth of Christ. For the past 50 years, starting in about 60 BC, okay, there had been a lot of tensions within the Roman Republic between some of these very powerful consuls and what they were doing to lead the Republic, but also what they were doing, kind of out on their own, right? Because so by the middle of the first century BC, you had this very dramatic internal tension between Pompey, the general Pompey, and then the general Julius Caesar. Okay, and these men had been, friends, frankly, right? They had
Right.
served in Roman government, they had been friends, but these are both also very powerful, very ambitious men. Okay, and they're starting to get on each other's nerves, frankly. I mean,
Yeah.
Julius Caesar has been off in Gaul and in Great Britain making a name for himself, making himself extraordinarily wealthy, while Pompey, so to speak, is back in Rome. He wasn't exclusively back in Rome, don't get me wrong. But Pompey is, so to speak, back in Rome, trying to keep everything, in order. But the reality of it is that, Pompey did more than his fair share of gallivanting around the Mediterranean, making a name for himself and
Right.
increasing his wealth and becoming an extraordinarily powerful person. So to kind of dumb it all down for us, you've got these two men, Pompey and Julius Caesar, coming up against each other in what basically would be a civil war, is
Right.
really what it boils down to.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know what's kind of interesting too? There was one day when the light went on up here, and I realized for the first time after reading a lot of this stuff, I was like, oh my, Cleopatra and Julius Caesar were alive at the same time. It never
Yes.
dawned on me. And they
Right.
were alive at the time of Christ. And for some reason, I never made that connection. And I don't know if
Right.
I'm the only one, but that's really, I for some reason in my mind, I don't place them at this time period, but here they are.
Yes, and the same thing happened to me. I mean, when I first started this research, I did not have. I had a degree in biblical theology, but I didn't have a degree in history at that time, and so I started digging into this stuff from a biblical perspective. But I had to learn the history because I had never
Right.
been taught it. I mean, I took some history in college, but I didn't take, like I said, classical or classical antiquity, the Greeks and the Romans. I had never taken that. It really was my interest in the Bible that required me to learn ancient Mediterranean and ancient Middle Eastern history. Who were the Assyrians? Who were the Babylonians? What was the Greek Empire and Alexander the Great, and then his generals?
Yeah.
So another piece of this puzzle, real quick, because
Go ahead.
is the fact that Alexander the Great, when his empire started to disintegrate, that was when, as we talked about in a previous session, the Parthian Empire popped up around the Caspian Sea and started moving west, right? Well, then the Roman Empire, founded in Rome, was moving east, and you had this dying Greek Seleucid Empire that was a buffer between the two of them. As each of these two superpowers started to encroach upon each other, they were going to meet, but for a long time, they were separated by the crumbling Greek Empire. And the reason I bring that up is because you mentioned Cleopatra, right? Cleopatra was a Macedonian Greek. She was not an Egyptian.
Right.
Okay. The ruling class of the country of Egypt from roughly 300 BC until the middle of the first century BC were Greeks, right? So it was when the Romans started to encroach on that is when now you bring Julius Caesar and Mark Antony and Cleopatra all into proximity with each other, interacting with each other. Now, they're all dead for several decades by the time of the birth of Christ, but you're absolutely correct in noting that this is the historical background. This is what makes this story so rich. And like I said, we're going to get into this about the Romans in particular tonight. Why is this such an amazingly rich story? Okay.
Yeah, and it also, I think, makes what we're talking about even more accessible to those who are watching, because in grade school, even, you hear about Mark Antony, you hear about Cleopatra, you hear about Julius Caesar. These are not people unknown to us.
Yeah, exactly. So like we said, by the time you get to about the middle of the first century BC, you've got these civil wars in Rome between these very powerful individuals, usually generals or senators or consuls, and they had to make some quote unquote adaptations to the government in order to maintain the peace, frankly, and keep these guys out of each other's hair, is really kind of what it boiled down to. So you had what was known as the First Triumvirate, and the Triumvirate was very simply a political agreement for these men to share power. So the First Triumvirate was between 59 and 53 BC, and that was Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, who we've just mentioned, and then a man named Marcus Licinius Crassus. Okay. That was the First Triumvirate. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time there, but, that was this adaptation to, frankly, keep these guys out of each other's hair, right? But that didn't happen. It didn't really work. They wound up going to war. In particular, Caesar and Pompey went to war against each other, okay? And Caesar won. Okay. So when Caesar won, one of the things that happened was that Pompey fled to Egypt to try to, find a life there. Basically, he knew at the barest of minimums he was going to be in exile for the rest of his life. And when he arrived in Egypt, he was assassinated. I mean, pretty much immediately upon arrival, he was assassinated by the Egyptians, in the belief that that would ingratiate them to Caesar, who had won this particular civil war, right? But when Caesar showed up, man, he was not a happy camper at all, because even though he had defeated Pompey in battle, this was an old friend, and he did not like the way that Pompey had met his fate. So that was part of what deterred. Egypt was already under Roman control at this point, but Caesar decided to really, stick it to the Egyptians at this point, and that he was going to control that country, right? Now, the irony is that when he arrived in Egypt, there was a civil war going on in Egypt, okay? And the civil war is between Cleopatra and her little brother, over which of those two was supposed to be the true monarch. And ironically, the Ptolemaic leader, the Macedonian Greek leader over the Egyptians, right? So Caesar joins into this civil war on the side of Cleopatra against her brother. Now, the irony is they start to lose. Okay. Caesar has just defeated Pompey, and now he's in another civil war, embroiled in another civil war in Egypt, fighting with Cleopatra against her little brother. He's in real dire straits, so significant enough that a foreign army had to come to his rescue.
Wow.
And this foreign army that came to his rescue was led by an Idumean court official in the royal court of Hyrcanus of Judea that we talked about last week. When we all talked about Herod and the Hasmoneans, you've got the Judean high priest Hyrcanus, the de facto king, right? But he's got a court official named Antipater, right?
Okay.
And Antipater puts together an army and goes to Julius Caesar's rescue in Egypt. So it's Jewish. It's a combination Jewish, Idumean, Nabatean, and all these different ethnicities in this army that he goes to his rescue. Well, this is really significant because what happens is that Caesar is so grateful for this that he appoints Antipater a Roman citizen for life, which means he doesn't have to pay taxes anymore. That's what that means. And then also Caesar appointed, here you go, Caesar appointed 2 of Antipater's sons governors of Judea and Galilee. He appointed Antipater's son Faisal, the governor of Judea, and appointed his son Herod, the governor of Galilee. Okay. So now you got to fast forward a few more years, and we run into the fact that now Julius Caesar has been appointed dictator for life by the Roman Senate, but that's really dicey because what we're seeing here is the transition from the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire.
Right.
And those who believe in the Republic they're not liking this because Caesar is going to become king, is what they're afraid of. And you're gonna go back to that political scenario where you've got a single ruler making all the decisions instead of having a representative republic, which is
a Senate.
Yeah, Senate. Yeah. So the dictator would have the power instead of the Senate having the power.
And they wanted the power diffused. So
exactly.
They didn't want it all in one person.
Exactly. So this is the part of the story that we actually know reasonably well, which is the fact that several of the senators got together and conspired against Caesar and assassinated him in 44 BC. Okay.
Right.
So now Pompey's out of the picture. He's dead. Caesar's out of the picture. He's dead. So now but you still have these powerful men trying to create, their legacy, so to speak. So now you have the second triumvirate. And the second triumvirate, of course, again, it's primarily for political expediency, but the whole idea is trying to keep each other out of each other's hair. Now, the first one, however, was far more political than this one. This one was actually legally sanctioned by the Senate, because the second triumvirate would have been Gaius Octavius, who is Julius Caesar's grandnephew, right?
Right.
The Roman general Marcus Antonius, who we call Mark Antony, right? And then a man named Marcus Lepidus, a Roman general. Okay, so they were the second triumvirate, and they agreed to divide up power. And like I said, because this is the way you keep each other out of each other's hair, is really kind of what it boils down to. But of course, this doesn't last very long, and they wind up in civil war against each other. And this time, however, it's primarily Mark Antony against Octavius, or Octavian. We anglicize it and we say Octavian instead of Octavius, right? And then so his name, just to be clear, so people can, like we said last week, you can't tell the players without a scorecard. You really do need a scorecard for this one. So his name, his given name when he was born was Gaius Octavius, right? He was, let's see if I can get it right. He was Julius Caesar's grand nephew, which meant he was his sister's, I forget. But he was
something like the sister's son, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, sister's son, or something like that, right? But for whatever reason, which to this day we don't really fully know, Caesar and Octavius, Julius Caesar and Octavius, became extraordinarily close. Just really, really great friends, and frankly, loved each other, really is what it boils down to such a degree that Julius Caesar, now Caesar is his name. That's actually his family name, right? Okay. But that Julius Caesar adopted Gaius Octavius and declared him his exclusive heir in his will. Okay. So Julius Caesar's entire fortune and power and position all went to Octavius,
You
right?
know, and it's worth pointing out here, and you can fill in some of the details that maybe I'm missing,
Mm-hmm.
but in the Romans were one of the first, or maybe the first culture that we know of that practiced adoption. And to be adopted into a Roman family was even better than being born into one because he couldn't be cut out of the will.
Right. Well, I mean, that's got a little bit to do with it. I mean, Gaius Octavius was from a noble family. His
Yeah.
father was a senator. So there was no problem with the level of nobility. And he was related to Julius Caesar. He was
Mhm.
related to him. So this wasn't like pure unbridled nepotism
Mhm.
necessarily. There was a connection there. And this is how power was, utilized back then. You passed your
You
power down.
handed it off and
You
tried to
handed
keep
it
it
off to
going.
your descendants and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So like I said, Julius Caesar declared Gaius Octavius his sole heir in his will. So all his fortune and power passed to Octavius. Okay. So now
Wow.
Octavius goes to war with Mark Antony because Mark Antony, he's not liking that too much. Okay. He did not like that at all because he wanted power as well. Okay. So they go to war, and Octavian defeats Antony and Cleopatra because Antony is now in league with Cleopatra in Egypt, right? And Octavian defeats Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. Okay. So this leaves Octavian the uncontested ruler of Rome. There is no one challenging him.
There's no one to challenge him. They're all
There's no
gone.
one to challenge him. So, beginning with that first triumvirate between Pompey and Caesar and Crassus, right? You
Mhm.
see this real shift. Rome isn't quite a republic anymore, but the Republicans are trying to hold on to it and keep it a republic, right? And then Caesar's assassinated. Then there's more civil war between Octavian and Antony. So it's still only marginally a republic, but now with Octavius becoming the uncontested leader, it's definitely not a republic anymore.
Yeah.
Octavian becomes the first emperor of the Roman Empire.
Hmm.
Okay. This is when the shift comes. The Roman Republic is no more. It is now the Roman Empire, and the Senate gets behind Octavius and grants him that position. And so they declare him the leader of Rome for life, and they do that in 27 BC. And corresponding with this, okay, because like I said, Octavian is the uncontested leader of the Roman Republic, quote unquote, right? Okay.
Mhm.
So the Senate is going to confirm that he is the legitimate leader. Octavian takes his grand uncle's legal name. Okay. So now he's Octavian Caesar.
Got
Okay.
it.
And then the Roman Senate appoints a title to him that in effect becomes his name. The
Got it.
title simply means magnificent in Latin, but it's the Latin word Augustus.
Hmm.
Okay. So this is Augustus Caesar. Okay.
Got it.
All right. And I do this, I share the detail only so people can, like I said, can't
Yeah.
tell your players without a scorecard.
And I know the
Gaius
months of
Octavian.
yeah. And I know the
Go ahead.
months of July and August are named after Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar, and they moved
Bingo.
October out from the 8th month because octo is 8 and moved it to the 10th month so that you could
Precisely.
accommodate July and August to go in the summer where they wanted to place them there for whatever reason. So now the 8th month is actually our 10th month.
Yep, exactly. Because the Roman calendar was a 10-month calendar.
Yes.
September 7, October 8, November 9, and December 10. It was a
Mm-hmm.
10-month calendar. And like you said, they changed the calendar to allow for Julius and Augustus Caesar. That's exactly correct. Okay.
Yeah.
So now, here you go. So now you've got the full-fledged Roman Empire. Okay. And
Yeah.
Octavian or Augustus is now the leader of this, of the Roman Empire. Now, something that happens is because he is now uncontested, the empire enters a period of relative peace. Okay. Now, the word relative is truly relative. Okay. Because the Romans didn't really consider peace simply to be the cessation of war, but they really considered peace to be peace through superior firepower. Okay. It meant that they were in control. So it doesn't mean there was no warfare or no conflicts. It was a term of relative peace, but this is known in history as the Pax Romana. And because this was a period of time when Rome was at
its peak,
relative peace, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And what is particularly interesting about this is they, of course, credited this to Augustus.
Exactly.
Okay. That he is the one responsible for this miracle. Okay. That there is relative peace throughout the Roman Empire. And by the way, his full title would have been Imperator Caesar Divi Filius Augustus, which
Say
translates
that
to,
3 times fast,
yeah,
huh?
yep.
That's
But
a
what
mouthful.
that means is that he's declaring himself to be God on earth.
Okay.
Okay. The divine Augustus, the divine Caesar, right? So you've got a man claiming to be God, right?
Okay. So this is where that's where that started then, is with this guy.
Sure. Well, it didn't start with him. This is actually a common practice throughout these ancient empires, that a lot of these emperors or kings would claim this very odd, unique thing of that. Well, yeah, I know I'm a human being and I had a human mother, but I'm really descended from the gods and stuff like that. So, Nebuchadnezzar claimed that.
Yes.
Alexander the Great claimed that. Darius of the Persians probably claimed that. I don't know for sure, but wouldn't surprise me for a bit, that Darius or Cyrus claimed that as well. So this is pretty common throughout that time. So now here you have, and Julius Caesar claimed it too, right?
Okay. Yeah.
The divine Caesar. So, but now what we can start to do is now we can start to overlap the Roman history with the biblical story, right?
Got it.
Because, oh, really? Do you think it's just a coincidence that you've got a world ruler, right? Because Rome is the known world at the time, right? That you've got a world ruler who is claiming to be human and divine.
Right.
Okay. And oh, by the way, the incarnation of the Son of God is about to happen.
Exactly.
Right.
So
Not
you got
this. Yeah. Right. You have a demonstration in the material realm. Okay. Frankly, of this eternal conflict, this eternal spiritual metaphysical conflict between God and the devil, quote unquote, right? Or in many ways it's actually between God and humanity, right? Being played out in real life, right in front of you, that you've got this God man, Augustus Caesar, and yet and of course he's huge, he's larger than life, he's the leader of the Roman Empire, they've crushed their enemies, and yet in a little backwater province in the Roman Empire, very quietly, there's a baby being born who is God incarnate, the Son of God, Jesus of Nazareth. So really interesting contrast as you start to overlay these things, because like I said, this is the context, is in the Roman Empire, they're calling Augustus the Prince of Peace.
Wow.
Okay. Because he is responsible for peace throughout the empire. Now, to add another layer, and this is where it gets really fun and interesting, but to add another layer to it, now we've got to start talking a little bit, at least, about the astronomy. Okay. Now, as I indicated earlier, I really handle the astronomy in the section on the Parthians. And that's because it's the Parthian magi, the Parthian wise men. They're the ones that read the stars and actually take action based upon what they see and travel to Judea to worship the King of the Jews, right? But that doesn't mean that they're the only culture that pays attention to astronomy. Okay? The Romans pay attention to astronomy as well. All right? And
got it.
So just to kind of put this in a little bit of context here, there was a conjunction of Jupiter and Venus on, let's see, the date was June 17th of 2 BC. Okay. Now, this is really interesting, see, because Augustus was appointed. So now you see, so okay, so again, so he was appointed emperor, tongue in cheek, appointed emperor he was acknowledged as being emperor by the Roman Senate in 27 BC. Okay.
Okay.
Now, fast forward 25 years. In February of 2 BC, the Roman Senate gave Augustus Caesar the title Pater Patriae, which means the father of the country. Okay. In recognition of this 25-year period of amazing peace throughout the empire. They're acknowledging that this is the Prince of Peace, right? Okay. So lo and behold, on June 17th of 2 BC, there is a conjunction of Jupiter and Venus that is just absolutely extraordinary. I don't remember how many degrees apart they are, but I do remember that when you read the descriptions of this, it says only the sharpest eyesight would have been able to tell that it was actually two stars, not one.
Because they were so close.
Because they were so close in how they lined up that as they came together over several days, they merged and looked like one. And when they were virtually on top of each other, it would have taken extraordinary eyesight to see that.
It would have been phenomenally bright in the sky too.
Yes, it would have been extraordinarily bright. It definitely would have gotten anybody who was even remotely astronomically in tune would have taken note of that, right? So part of why I am mentioning this is because modern astronomers take note of that date, okay, as being one of only a very small handful of astronomical occurrences in history that deserves this kind of attention, right? And there was actually a symposium at Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles in 1980, where the staff of the observatory and some scholars and some others got together to discuss the fact that this occasion, June 17, was just extraordinary. And as a result, John Moseley, who was the program manager, the program supervisor for Griffith Observatory from like the late 70s until roughly 2005, 2006, John Moseley was so impressed by this information at this symposium that he convinced everybody that they needed to reprogram the planetarium projector, the Zeiss planetarium projector that's at Griffith, right? To reprogram that to examine what the stars looked like. Here you go. Ready? To examine what the stars looked like between 3 BC and 1 BC.
Wow.
So they completely reprogrammed the Zeiss instrument to look at the stars, and they actually had a private showing. And when they did this private showing, everybody sat there and went, oh my God, at this extraordinary astronomical events that occurred in an 18-month period of time.
They all lost it because there were so many spectacular things going on.
Exactly. So that was 1980, right? Now, there had been some additional research earlier than that, because remember what we've talked about in one of our other sessions is the fact that up until the 19th century, biblical scholars were in pretty much uniform agreement that Jesus had to have been born in either 3 BC or 2 BC. And then all of a sudden in the 19th century, due to the work of, what's his name? I'm blanking on his name. Emil Schur, right? Due to the work of Emil Schur said, oh, no, that's not right. Herod died in 4 BC. So we've got to be looking earlier than 4 BC. So from the 1890s, when Schur made that declaration, until about 1965, so 65, 70 years there, nobody looked at the stars from 3 to 1 BC. Okay. Everybody was focused on 4 BC or earlier because that's what Schur had said had to be the time frame, and everybody bought it. Okay. So now in 1965, roughly, some scholars started re-looking at this and went, no, wait a second. Herod died in 1 BC. Herod died in 1 BC, and we've been neglecting this period of time from 3 to 2, right? Which, like I said a second ago, prior to Emil Schur, everybody was in agreement that Christ had to have been born in 3 or 2 BC. And it was only because of Emil Schur that it threw this giant monkey wrench in the works.
Let me stop you for 1 second, just so the viewer can maybe make some sense out of this.
Sure.
When you lead up to the birth of Christ, the numbers are going in a backward. So it's 3,
Correct.
2, 1 to the birth of Christ, and we get to the numbers going forward.
Yes.
Why are we saying, a negative number? Why is that off? Why does it seem like it would be before Christ that figure coming in?
We would almost need an entire show to decipher that question.
But what's the Reader's Digest condensed answer?
The Reader's Digest version is that the dating system that we use today was actually developed by a Roman Catholic monk named Dionysius Exiguus in either the 4th or the 5th century, right? So he developed this dating system actually long after the fact, okay? And at least he had the wherewithal to configure it around the most important date in human history, which is the birth of Christ, right? So he determined, according to Dionysius Exiguus, he believed that Jesus was born on December 25th of 1 BC, right? Now, like I said, that's where this whole, to sort all that out would take way too much time. But now fast forward 500 years, 1,000 years, 1,500 years, we've been living with that dating system for so long that now we're simply expressing Jesus's birth in a dating system that we understand.
Yes.
Dionysius Exiguus had, like I said, he had the wherewithal to at least focus on the most important date in human history. He pegged it as December 25th, 1 BC, but now through additional research, we say, nah, he was off in his calculations.
Just
Jesus
a little bit.
He had to have been born earlier, like 2 or 3 BC, right? So that's why we go backwards, is because it was just additional research over time just proved to be more accurate, right?
Yeah. So we have the evidence of when people died and when people were born and tax laws and things that happened. And we're fortunate because even though this was so long ago, what I find really interesting is that these are people who were almost maniacal about keeping really good records. So we're fortunate that they were so paranoid about keeping the records, or where would we be now?
Sure. So now let me try to kind of bring all of this together, because we've taken kind of just a little bit of a detour to talk about the astronomy for a second. Right?
Yes.
So this particular event, this is only one event on June 17th of 2 BC, really got everybody's attention. So the crew at Griffith and a lot of others really re-examined the astronomy. Okay. And this is very interesting because I'll go ahead and I'll hold these up and so people can show it on camera, is because one of the men at this symposium in 1980 was a biblical chronologist named Jack Finnegan. Okay. Now, Jack Finnegan has one of the best biblical chronologies there is, period. Right. And there it is. The Handbook of Biblical Chronology by Jack Finnegan. Right. So Jack Finnegan was at the symposium, okay, and was part of why we pointed out the fact that there was this amazing conjunction on June 17th. And then when John Moseley, reprograms the planetarium computer to look at this year and a half worth of celestial events, everybody gets their mind blown.
Yeah.
Now everybody starts really digging into this period of time to discover what's going on. Now, John Moseley, by the way, just so people are aware, he what's the name of it's an academic journal, the International Planetarium Society. So he's the editor for the International Planetarium Society. He's written thousands of articles on this stuff, and he's even written books himself about what was the Star of Bethlehem, right? And John Moseley also he's behind the Starry Night software, which is the software that I use when I talk about the astronomy, okay? So that's John Moseley, right? The program director at Griffith Observatory. This is no small thing, right? And he's working hand in hand with Jack Finnegan, one of the most amazing biblical chronologists of his time. And then I don't know how closely they would have worked with Ernest Martin. I have to imagine they worked very closely together, but I don't know for sure because Ernest Martin was based out of Pasadena. Okay. Now, for people who don't know this, I live in Pennsylvania right now, but I spent the past 20 years in Los Angeles. So I know the area. I've been to Griffith more times than I can count because for this exact reason, and understanding who Finnegan is, who Moseley is, and then who Ernest Martin is because he was based out of Pasadena. Ernest Martin is the man who wrote this book. Okay. So this is the later version. His first version was simply called The Birth of Christ Recalculated. Okay. And that was published in 1980. All right. Because he had been working on this same stuff. And then because of what Griffith dug up because of reprogramming the planetarium computer, now he was able to see things he hadn't seen. See, all through the 1980s, Griffith was doing a planetarium show on the Star of Bethlehem and blowing people away, showing them this amazing thing that was a combination of Moseley and Finnegan, and I think Martin was directly involved in doing this planetarium show. So then Martin edited his book and then rewrote it and republished it. This is the 1996 version called The Star That Astonished the World. And although we have learned a truckload more since then, this is still one of the best books on the nativity and specifically on the astronomy that I have ever read. Okay. So now to bring it all together and to put this in perspective, okay, the Romans would have been reading the stars as well. And the Romans would have applied that to Augustus, okay? So they would have seen the same stars and applied it to Augustus, okay? Now, obviously, the actual celestial observation itself was in 2 and 3 BC. But there's a couple of really interesting points that I should make that, again, they just put this in this amazing, epic context and contrast, okay? And that is, there was a prophecy, okay, or as I should say, there was a decree issued by the Roman Senate in 63 BC based upon celestial observation that they said we need to kill every male child born in Rome in 63 BC. And because based upon celestial observation, they determined that the new king of the Romans would be born in 63 BC. And like we talked about earlier, this was the Republic, and the Republic was super paranoid about the idea of a Roman king.
Got it.
Okay, so in the midst of the Roman Republic, based upon celestial observation and astronomy and astrology, the Roman Senate issues a decree that says we have to kill every male child. Sound familiar? Kill
Yeah.
every male child born in Rome or in certain provinces in 63 BC. Well, they missed someone because Augustus was born in 63 BC.
Wow.
So their pogrom didn't work. They didn't manage to kill Augustus, and so isn't this interesting that he became the Roman emperor? Okay, in 27 BC. So my point here is that this is the mindset that is going on in Rome that leads up to the birth of Christ. They're anticipating a world ruler, right? They're anticipating the Prince of Peace. Now, they've got it all wrong. They're all pointing it at Caesar, but look at this amazing context and here it is, the king of the universe, right?
Yeah, because the Romans are in charge. They think they're, as my wife would say, all that in a bag of chips.
Yep.
So they're looking at what's going on in the sky and they're pointing at themselves going, see, look how great we are. We got it all figured out.
Right. And then the Roman poet Virgil, he wrote these poems called eclogues, right? And that's roughly 38 BC. But in his fourth eclogue, he basically prophesies this world leader, right? Now, again, now Christians over the years have tried to bend this and make it about Christ. And I'm not necessarily saying that it is about Christ. I just find it very, very provocative that, Virgil's golden age that he was prophesying, that would be ushered in by this world ruler born in the Mediterranean, right? And see, there it is. So my whole point is that it's just really stunning that the the backstory with the Romans is all about a world ruler called the Prince of Peace.
That's pretty wild. That's pretty wild because everything is lining up. It's like parallel.
Yeah, and the fact that, and then the contrast, of course, is that God just did something quietly behind the scenes, you know?
Hey, I got about 3 minutes.
Yep.
I got about 3 minutes. So what would you like to get on the air before we go bye-bye?
Well, we kind of timed it pretty well because that really is the punchline, right? That really is the punchline. When you look at, now when you put all the big pieces together, right? So here we go. The Judean Chronicle, right?
Yeah.
The Hasmoneans, the ruling class, right? They've been ruling Judea as an independent kingdom for 150 years now, but anybody with a brain knows it's something not quite right about it, right? Because they're taking it all the way back to the original covenant with Abraham, where God promised Abraham that I'm going to make of you a great nation. I'm going to put you in a land of my choosing, and then I'm going to bless you in that land. Well, that's the Messianic age, and the Jews have never experienced it. They were close during the time of David. Now the Hasmoneans have kind of flirted with it again, but in the back of every observant Jew's mind, they're going, when is the real Messiah, the real son of David going to come, right? And then
so now, knowing all of this, we get that question that they ask Jesus, which makes so much more sense when they say, are you going to restore the kingdom now to Israel?
Yes, that's exactly what they were talking about, because messianic expectation has been at a peak now since the late 1st century BC, all the way up and into Jesus's earthly ministry, is that this is what every Jew is anticipating. They're anticipating the messianic age when God will fulfill his promises to Abraham of a great nation with the anointed one as their leader, and God dwelling in the midst of his people.
Yeah, in about a minute, just elaborate just a little bit about the actual date of the birth.
Oh, so just very quickly, For those that may have not heard this before, I really believe that Jesus was born on September 11th of 3 BC. We get this from Revelation chapter 12, verse 1, where we are given an astronomical sign, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon underneath her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. But the date in the Gregorian calendar isn't nearly as important as the date in the Hebrew calendar, which would have been the first day of Tishri, the feast of Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets, which would mean that as Jesus was being born at roughly sunset on the 1st of Tishri, 6 miles away in the temple in Jerusalem, they would have been blowing shofars announcing his birth, announcing the incarnation of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords in Judea.
And that would be the day, I believe, that they called the King's Day, correct?
Possibly. I don't know that off the top of my head, but that was the day they were, it was the day they inaugurated their kings or reckoned their regnal years.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating that here he is being born when the trumpets are blowing, or actually the shofars are blowing, saying, hey, birth of a king, and they were none the wiser. They didn't know.
Right. And most people didn't know.
And one more thing, as we can squeeze in, what was so special about the shepherds that showed up?
Because they just represent everybody. They are every man.
Weren't they a special type of shepherd?
It's
weren't
possible
they Levitical?
It is possible that they were rabbinic shepherds who oversaw temple flocks for sacrifice at the temple. That's a distinct possibility. We don't know it for sure, but regardless, the shepherds are unique in the sense that they just represent every man. That he was born of such humble beginnings, and the first people that ever saw him were just your average Joe.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much, Tim. I really do appreciate it. We got to wrap this up. And folks, I hope you've been enjoying this series. We got another show at least to go, and hope you're learning some really interesting background to the birth of Christ. It's something that we think we know all so well, but we really don't when you understand the backstory. And we'll be talking about this some more. Folks, I'm Kevin Gallagher, and you can tune into the TV show every Friday night, 8:30 p.m., every Monday morning at 11 a.m. on Comcast here in Connecticut. If you want to listen to the program, you can go to the Truth Be Told Radio Network, and you can listen 9 p.m. at night. That's Eastern time on the network. And also you can go into the Truth Be Told Radio Network's Facebook page, Twitch page, or YouTube page, and you can see the shows there, as well as other shows that appear on the radio network. So I really do thank you for joining us. Have a great night. Bye-bye.